Hi, everyone. Welcome back to UCLA Health's Medically Speaking. I'm your host, Dr. Eve Glazier. Colorectal cancer is one of the most preventable cancers we face. And yet in 2026, more than 55,000 people in the United States are expected to die from it. And what's especially alarming is what we're seeing in younger adults. Colorectal cancer is now the leading cause of cancer death in people under 50. These are staggering and heartbreaking numbers for disease where screening can truly change outcomes, and in many cases, prevent cancer before it even starts. So if you've been putting your screening off, waiting for a symptom or the right time, consider this your nudge. It's Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and we're turning awareness into action. Today, we're going to break down what screening really means, how to choose the option that best fits you, what symptoms you should never wait for, and how to get past the real-life barriers so this actually gets done. And to help us do this, I'm joined by an incredible duo and two of my favorite professional nudgers. Katie Couric is back with us, award-winning journalist, advocate, co-founder of Stand Up to Cancer, and the person who changed how Americans think about colorectal cancer screening. And we're also joined by my UCLA Health colleague, Dr. Fola May, gastroenterologist, health equity researcher, and someone who's been working to redesign care so everyone can get screened and get the follow-up they need. Katie, Fola, welcome.
Thank you for having us. So happy to be here. Yes. Happy to be here with Fola and with you again, Eve. Thank you for bringing attention to this important issue. I can't think of anything more important, especially given that it's Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month.
Absolutely.
Before we dive in, I'd love to just have a minute so everyone can meet our guests, even though they probably already know a lot about you. But if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share why this work matters so much to each of you. And Katie, your advocacy, I think most people know, is deeply personal, and you've talked openly about losing your husband, Jay, to colon cancer when he was only 42, and how that changed how you wanted to really use and leverage your platform. My question, just to start, is when you think about him and you think about young people today who are busy and they're very young and they say, I'll do it later, what do you want them to most to understand?
Well, gosh, when I think about him, I mostly think about everything he's missed. You know, I have a grandson now named Jay, who's going to be 2 this month. My daughter is pregnant with the second child, Ellie. My other daughter is in Charlottesville, Virginia, getting her PhD in history, and I know he'd really get a kick out of that, and they'd have a lot to talk about. But, you know, graduations and weddings and milestones that sadly he couldn't be there for. So I always think about that first and foremost. And then I think about the fact that he was 41 when he was diagnosed. And I remember I treated it as a sort of intrepid journalist and did research right away. And one of the things I learned that back then, 13% of colon cancer patients were under the age of 50. And I was furious thinking, what are these people expendable? You know, there's no screening recommendation. I don't think many internists or family doctors necessarily imagine that a young person, at least back then, could be showing signs of colorectal cancer. And, you know, now very much on my mind, Eve, as with Fola, is this alarming increase of colorectal cancer among people under the age of 50. The screening age was lowered by the American Cancer Society a couple of years ago to 45. Unfortunately, only 1 in 5 people under the age from 45 to 50 are getting screened. So we really need to get that word out that it is now 45. But what I'm concerned about is all the cases I'm hearing people in their 30s, 40s, some even in their 20s who are being diagnosed with this disease. So that's, I'm thinking from a public health perspective, how we, get the word out about 45, but also how we address all these young people who are being diagnosed and how we come up with potentially different kinds of screenings that can be used that are less expensive, less invasive, and, you know, make sure that these young people in the prime of their lives have their colorectal cancer detected early when it's most treatable.
Right. And also have access to that screening. And before we get into all that, Fola, I'd love to hear a little bit about you. I mean, you're a gastroenterologist. You still see patients all the time, but you're also a health equity researcher. I'd love it if you could tell us what exactly that means. And really, I mean, I don't think I've even ever asked you this. Why have you decided to commit, really your energy to colon cancer prevention, and then especially this early onset work?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me.
You're here.
And I have to say, it's amazing to be here with this fierce advocate on this amazing stage. I really consider you one of our first advocates in colorectal cancer. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Thanks,
and I just want to thank you for continuing to raise awareness about this disease. As you mentioned, my name is Fola May. I'm a physician at UCLA. I spend some of my time taking care of patients, but actually the majority of my time running my lab. And my lab is a clinical research lab that focuses on colorectal cancer. We try to understand why people get and die from colorectal cancer. We try to make sure that as many people as possible get screened for colorectal cancer. And we also try to make sure through our health equity work that everyone has access to screening, regardless of their income, their race, their ethnicity, where they live in the United States. So a lot of our research is really focused about working in community health centers and under-resourced settings or under-resourced parts of the country to make sure that people have access to screening tests. You asked me the why. I've always been really fascinated by diseases that impact the digestive system. And when I went into training for gastroenterology, really just happened across colorectal cancer as a public health problem. And around that time, I actually found out that it also impacts my family. So I didn't know it, but I was one of these people who had colorectal cancer in my family, and no one was really talking about it. And that really solidified my career path for me.
Why do you think no one was talking about it?
I think there's a real stigma about cancer in general. And then I think when there are cancers that affect intimate parts of the body, like the colon, like the rectum, there's some level of embarrassment, maybe even a level of not understanding or even self-blame that can make people uncomfortable talking about it. And I think that in my family, it took us a long time to feel comfortable talking about the disease that affected my grandfather. That's very different now, and we're very open about it, and we're all screened, which is great.
Well, thanks to the work that both of you do. I thought it would be great to just take a moment and really define what screening is, because I think we were talking about speaking in plain language. It's really, I think, if you're not in the medical world, even the definition of just screening can be a little bit confusing. So quick definition moment. What does screening actually mean? And why do we want to see people when they feel fine?
So screening, I'll start.
Yeah.
Screening is a preventive health effort to reduce the potential impact of a disease. And in the setting of cancer, we screen to either find polyps of the colon before they turn into cancer, or to find cancer early enough that we have the best chances of curing the individual of it. We're really fortunate in colorectal cancer that screening allows us to both prevent colorectal cancer by finding polyps, and it also allows us to early detect colorectal cancer. In other cancers that we screen for, we're mostly just looking for early signs of the cancer, but here we have the extra benefit that we can find polyps in the colon and take them out before they transform.
Exactly. And Katie, I'm sure you hear this all the time when people say, wait, I don't have any family history, right? I'm good, or my bowel movements are normal. I mean, I'm sure you could tell us why that's such a dangerous assumption.
Yes, most colorectal cancer cases are sporadic. I think, Fola, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like 75 to 80%
exactly right.
of colorectal cancers have no family history. So I always say no family history is no guarantee. But I think what's really amazing about the colon is it's almost like a package, right? You can obviously have early detection for other cancers, like breast cancer, for example, and I had early stage breast cancer a couple of years ago. But with colorectal cancer, if you're able to catch it early, as Fola said, and you see these polyps that could or couldn't develop into cancerous growths, and you're able to remove them during the process of a colonoscopy, if they haven't penetrated the colon wall through the lymph nodes, which is kind of like the gateway. Tell me if I'm saying this right, Fola.
Dr. Couric.
I was going to say Dr. Couric.
Then if it permeates the colon wall through the lymph nodes, then it becomes systemic disease.
Exactly.
And can be stage 3. And then stage 4 is, of course, when it metastasizes on other organs, most usually the liver, the lung, things like that. But it's just this genius way because it's encased, if you will.
Absolutely.
And, I don't want to compare it to a sausage, but it kind of is, right? Encased in this outer part of the colon. And that's why it's so critically important that people get screened. And you mentioned symptoms. People need to be keenly aware of symptoms, particularly because we're seeing these cases prior to people turning the age of 45, which is the age of baseline screening, 10 years before your first-line relative, by the way. For example, Ellie and Carrie, my daughters, Jay was diagnosed when he was 41. They both are getting screened at 31. Right. Carrie just turned 30, so she'll get screened at 31. Ellie has already been screened. So it's just really important that you get screened when you're feeling well, which is so counterintuitive for people. I think they think, well, I feel fine. Nothing's wrong with me. But that's the way this cancer operates. By the time you're symptomatic, oftentimes the cancer has advanced, sadly. So if you have blood in your stools, you need to see your doctor right away. And if the doctor says it's just a hemorrhoid, you need to find another doctor to really check it out. If you have a change in your bowel habits, like your bowel movements look different. I know it's, I feel totally comfortable talking about this stuff because that kid's book, everybody poops. Everybody poops. It's sort of like the vast majority of people have colons, and we have to take care of them as much as any other part of our bodies. But, unexplained weight loss, bloating, any kind of just not feeling right sort of in your digestive tract, you need to talk to your doctor. And that's why screening is so important. But again, I hope we spend a lot of time because to me, even Fola, what's the real conundrum is what do we do about these younger patients? As we said, they predicted, I think, later this year, colorectal cancer was going to be the number one killer of men and women under the age of 50, and it happened sooner than they thought. So what do we do from a public health policy to get screening or to get better screening or make it more accessible to people? And secondly, the big question I've been asking is, why the hell is this happening?
That's my new. I think that yes, it happened a couple of years ago. 45 being the new 50. But I think it's still a surprise for everyone. But the early onset colorectal cancer. It's very, very alarming. And of course, Jay was only 41, 42. Fola, what is driving this? What are your thoughts about what's going on, and how do we, to your point, Katie, talk about it so that young people hear it and we drive them to screening, but we're not panicking them?
Yeah, but this is the problem.
It's the conundrum.
They're not being told to get screened,
right?
And they haven't been told because it's a big change. Right.
But we're telling them now.
Shift.
But a lot of people. This is why we have so much wood to chop when it comes to this issue. But first, I think we should talk about why it's happening, and then we can talk about what needs to change from a public health perspective.
Absolutely.
Because why it's happening is super fascinating to me.
And I think it's really important to recognize that this is a major shift. So when I was in medical school, which wasn't that long ago, we taught medical students that colorectal cancer was the disease you saw people when they were 70 or 80.
A retirement disease, yes.
It was an old man's disease. Let's just be honest. That's what we called it. And it is not how we need to teach about colorectal cancer now. When I'm teaching my medical students now, I tell them that if you see concerning symptoms, like the symptoms that Katie just mentioned, you need to be thinking about this disease even in a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, and a 50-year-old. And that epidemiologic shift, that population shift, is why the story is very different than it was in the 1980s and the 1990s, right?
But the story changed so fast.
It changed. It's affecting men and women. It's affecting young people. It's being diagnosed at very late stages when we have very little opportunity to cure those individuals. So these shifts in how the disease is presenting has really caused us to shift how we think of the disease and also how we manage it. I think Katie just dropped some really important pearls, and I like to think of them as the 3 rules. There are 3 rules about how we protect ourselves from colorectal cancer when we talk about screening and symptoms. Number 1, know your family history. If you've got a mother, father, brother, and sister, first-degree family history of colorectal cancer, you get screened at age 40 are 10 years below the age of the earliest family member's diagnosis. The second rule is if you don't have a family history, you get screened at 45. And as mentioned, that was the new guideline that came in 2021, okay, as a result of this epidemiologic shift. The third thing is the symptoms. And this is where the early onset story comes into play. Because when you're talking about people who are under the age of 45, we're no longer in that screening age, right? So what are we paying attention to in that group? And in that group, we have to pay attention to the symptoms. People who have new and persistent abdominal pain, new and persistent diarrhea or constipation, people who are experiencing GI discomfort that is not going away, not just kind of like a viral gastroenteritis over the weekend, but something that's lasting weeks and weeks and weeks. This warrants us to get medical attention.
Unexplained weight loss.
And that's when it's really bad, when we see iron deficiency,
Yes.
low blood counts, unexplained weight loss. Those are usually signs of pretty spread disease. So we want to be paying attention to symptoms even before that, but of course as well. And the workup for that should be a colonoscopy. And as alluded to, you should be talking to your doctor and specifically saying, is a colonoscopy something that we should be considering?
Right, and I just want to bring up a point too, because you mentioned hemorrhoids, and you're mentioning, I think, younger and younger people. And I think so much is about not dismissing or normalizing pain or symptoms, right? I mean, if you're a young woman and you're like, oh, I also have heavy periods, I'm iron deficient. I mean, it's just a wake-up call for everyone to say, like, no, don't hang your hat too quickly on what you think is a diagnosis. And like you're saying, advocate, get a new doctor if you don't feel like you're being listened to.
And those are the biggest mimickers. The biggest
Yes.
mimickers are women who have heavy menses, who are told that they're iron deficient because of their menses, and then also people who have hemorrhoids.
Yes.
So people who've had small amounts of blood in their stool from hemorrhoids are often those symptoms are often just attributed to hemorrhoids when they actually warrant further investigation. So exactly, those are the things that we need to be paying attention to in young people.
But what's frustrating for me, you guys, is this isn't enough. You know, it's not enough to say, be aware of your symptoms. It's not enough to say, find a gastroenterologist. It just isn't enough to stop this alarming increase of colorectal cancer. So for me, it's like, and I know epidemiological studies, it's a very hard
I know,
word
you
to
might have
say.
to define
You
that
just
for
said
us.
it perfectly.
Dr.
Epidemiological
Couric or
studies.
Dr. May, could you define that for us?
They're really hard to do.
Yes.
They take years and years.
Yeah.
But I am desperate for scientists, so much so that I'd love to form a new dream team at Stand Up to Cancer, really looking at this issue, because there are now early onset cancer, colorectal cancer departments in virtually every medical center now
Absolutely.
because of the alarming number of people who are being diagnosed with this disease. But you know, just being aware of the symptoms, I just get frustrated because yes, at the very least, we have to be aware of the symptoms. We also have to educate doctors to really understand
You're right.
this is happening at a very alarming rate, and they cannot completely dismiss the idea that this person could have early stage or tragically late stage
Right.
colorectal
This
cancer.
young, healthy person in front of you with no
because so
family
many,
history.
I think, as Fola will tell you, so many of these people who are young, because they have been dismissed or because they themselves have dismissed the symptoms, they are being diagnosed very late at stage 4.
Absolutely.
Because it's just not within sort of the realm of possibility for their physicians or for themselves. So yes, we have to be aware of symptoms, and people have to be aggressive, but we have to do more.
So what's on that list for you that more? I mean, tell us about, Stand Up to Cancer too. I mean, what can research do? What can we as doctors do? What should the public be doing?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think we need to support science. I think we need to collaborate. There is a lot of work going on, and we can talk about this, Eve, because this to me is really kind of some of the most interesting things if I want to geek out on the science of why this is happening. So I think we need to support the research about that. And then hopefully, as things become apparent, we can educate people about these things, change their behavior, whatever is happening, figure out how to avoid it. But I think we should talk about all the theories because it's fascinating.
No.
Fola, tell us. I mean,
No,
I think everyone
it's-
wants to know this.
I mean, Katie wants to get to the why, and we all want to know why is this happening, right? And I think you're right. It isn't enough to screen because we know that's only going to catch people who are of screening age, and it isn't enough to just wait for symptoms because many times this cancer is asymptomatic. So what are we doing beyond that? You know, we can talk about lifestyle modification, and that lifestyle modification is really dictated by what we think is causing this. And right now, we just have a lot of theory.
Yeah.
We do not have a case as we had with lung cancer where there is the smoking gun,
this really
tobacco
identified cause.
is
Yeah,
causing
literally.
this cancer in 50% of cases. We don't unfortunately have that for colorectal cancer. What we probably have is a combination of environmental factors that in conglomerate are making us more predisposed to this condition. And then I think certain families have genetics in there that when thrown into this environmental risk basin, they're more likely to develop this disease. And many of us in science are working furiously to understand the whys. Is it what we eat? There's a lot of data right now about highly processed food or ultra processed foods.
That was
right?
in JAMA, I think, in November.
Yes, that was
and I
Andy
met
Chan's paper.
And I met the author.
Yeah.
And I was
Did you
very
author it
excited.
too?
No, but I was very excited to meet him. But I do have a bone to pick with him because I don't think ultra processed foods alone can be responsible for the
think it
alarming
is.
increase. But tell us about that study that was in JAMA last November.
Yeah, so this study was really helpful because we've been getting tips of information from science over time. And we've known to date that diets that are high in fat, as particularly animal fat, processed meat, red meat, those are things that we've always considered as risk factors for colorectal cancer.
Yeah, like deli meats, like hot dogs and all that
Your
stuff.
charcuterie plate. I'm sorry, but
like
you love your
nitrates and
charcuterie
stuff.
plate.
Don't
Not
look at
good
me.
for
I don't
you.
love a charcuterie
I love a
plate.
charcuterie plate.
She was looking
Me
at you,
and my
Katie.
girlfriends love a charcuterie plate. They don't like to hear me say reduce your alcohol in your charcuterie.
I guess just cheese for Katie.
Exactly. So we've had some tips, and Andy Chan's paper that came out recently on ultra processed food did provide evidence looking at women specifically in the women's nurses study that when you have a greater intake of these highly processed foods, and these are foods, you should think about highly processed things that are packaged and ready to eat, food that does not look like its normal form, okay? So milk and butter are processed, right? We have to do some processing to make them consumable by humans. But things like processed foods are things where they've actually broken down the extra components of the food and also added additives, glues, synthetics, preservatives
Gums
to make
and all
it
that
tasty
stuff.
and
Yeah.
ready to eat and also sit on the shelf for
Right,
a
right.
decade, right? So we think that the more of those you consume, it's adding to this kind of milieu where you are more predisposed to developing colorectal cancer. So there's definitely a lot of data about diet. There are also a lot of concerns about other environmental exposures we have, the synthetics that we use in our clothes and
Forever
our
chemicals,
food,
right?
PFAS, as we call
Yes.
forever chemicals. And we started using those products more in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and that's right around the time where we see the birth groups where those people who were born in around that time, 1950, 1960, went on to live into their 40s, and then that's the group where we started to see these
That would
early
be like my
onset.
husband.
Be like Jay.
My husband was born in
That's the birth cohort
1956.
effect.
Yeah.
So
But there are
that-
other things. Let's talk about some of the other theories, Fola, because I think it's so
Yeah.
interesting. I mean,
There's so
and
many
again, I think
theories.
some of these have not been borne out scientifically,
Yes.
but people are looking at the over prescription of antibiotics.
Antibiotics. That's
You
another
know,
big one.
that perhaps it's affecting the bacteria and
the microbiome.
our
Yes.
microbiome, right? That's one thing they're looking at.
And
know,
you can
because
actually
I guess
think
it's-
about that as microbiome as a risk factor in itself.
Do you mind just breaking down what the microbiome
Yes,
is?
let's
Yeah,
talk about
because
it.
it's. I always think about the microbiome, and I try to picture it. I
know.
always have a hard
It's
time.
very catchy
picturing the
sounding, but I like.
microbiome.
How do we actually
Like,
visualize
what is
it?
that thing?
I mean, I think of it as the coral reef of your
Oh, I love
GI
it.
tract,
Yes.
right? So, like in a coral reef, there's different types
this
of fish
ecosystem.
and
But is
animals.
it in your
and
colon or is
it's-
it in your
it's
stomach? Is it
it's
everywhere?
It's your entire GI tract. You even have
Starting
a
in your mouth?
microbiome in your mouth.
Yeah,
Right?
right. Well, that's why heart disease with tooth decay
That's
can
right.
affect
Oh,
heart
yeah,
disease,
absolutely.
right? But that's
You get
another
infections.
that's
Notice,
another
and we did a
podcast.
whole session on that. We did
That's
a podcast
so
on
interesting.
that. Mouth is just an open wound. Okay,
Yeah,
but please
go ahead. Sorry.
take us to the microbiome.
But in particular,
We get very excited talking about
But
this.
in particular, the microbiome, or that environment of microbiomes that live in your colon, are probably implicated in colorectal cancer. And there's kind of two diverging theories here. There are people who think that it's the environment and the mixture of things you have in that
Like
coral
good and
reef.
bad bacteria?
Like, what is your balance of good and bad microbes? And then there are other people that think that it's more specific microbes that have a causal effect, a cause and effect, causing cancers. So we don't know which way or if it's a combination of those things, but basically what we understand is anytime we disrupt that beautiful coral reef, that homeostasis there, we put our colon in a state where it has a likelihood of developing a colorectal cancer.
So what about this whole theory, which I don't really understand, but I read about it about E. coli and about a particular bacteria that exists in some people really from a very young. Will you help me understand that?
So there are a few bacteria that are implicated in cancers. The most common one, I think you're thinking about, is H. pylori, which
Yes,
usually is implicated in gastric cancer.
Is that the same
That's
as E.
in your
coli
stomach.
or different?
Different.
Okay.
Yes.
H. pylori is something that you can get infected with, or it can grow in your body since a child, right? And when you're later in life, in your 60s, 70s, and 80s, it has a higher risk for gastric cancer. So we often will test people for this, and then we can eradicate it by giving you a set of antibiotics.
Why do
lot.
some people have it and some people don't?
So it's a lot about where you live.
Yes.
So there's certain parts of the world where
Australia.
this H. pylori, really?
That's the guy who
I think of
discovered
South
it was in
America,
Australia.
but also, there are parts of the world where this H. pylori is just everywhere. It's in the food you eat. It's walking around in the communities that you live in. So those people are more likely to be inhabited with that bacteria. And for some people, you live with it forever and it does nothing.
Right.
But unfortunately, for a small percentage of people, it can go on to cause gastric cancer. So now we're looking
So
for
you're talking about
what
gastric stomach cancer?
stomach
Okay.
cancer. So the question is there like an H. pylori-like bug of the colon that's implicated for colorectal cancer? Recently, there is a species of E. coli that has shown up in some colorectal cancers, but it certainly does not explain what we're seeing because it's not in all colorectal
Right.
cancers.
Can you
So-
test for H. pylori? Am I
Yes.
saying
Yes,
this
you
right?
can.
And,
You can.
And if so, should it be tested and sort of kind of
Eradicated?
destroyed?
Like, yeah.
Thank you.
Or
Eradicated,
part of this sort of, like,
eradicated
screening.
sort of
Yeah.
early
So-
on, because if there's a chance, isn't it kind of like a polyp? Like you never know, so you probably should get rid of it?
So for right now, in many parts of the world, particularly Asian countries, they do test regularly.
Yes.
They screen for H. pylori, and they do eradicate it with these antibiotics because they have a higher likelihood of getting gastric cancer in these parts of the world. We don't test everyone in this country for H. pylori, but in my practice, and I'm sure everybody else's, when we have people who've immigrated from East Asia, our families who've immigrated from parts of South America even, some people will even say in big urban cities like Los Angeles, when you have patients with a certain set of symptoms, we should be testing for H. pylori. But again, that's more about gastric cancer.
But
and
that's
we
so
don't,
interesting because I know that when people who live in Asia
Yeah.
come to the U.S. and adopt a more American
That's right.
diet, their colon cancer rates go way up.
Yeah.
And I remember reading, and maybe this is wrong, Fola, that for gastric cancer or stomach cancer in Asian communities, that they think it might have to do with fermentation, or is that something there, or is that because they're not getting colon cancer because of fermentation? I don't know.
That I think for Asian countries, the biggest risk factor is that H. pylori living in your gut for a long period of time and causing gastric cancer, but it doesn't have a protective effect for colorectal cancer. They screen for gastric cancer, but they also screen for colorectal cancer. And what I would say is really interesting with this early onset epidemic, we said that's just the study of trends over time, is that we're seeing it in many different countries. This is not a U.S. problem. And,
It's true.
and really going
All
back
over
to
the
talking
world.
about colorectal cancer in young people, the highest rates are like in Australia, New Zealand, as you mentioned, Puerto Rico, we see really high rates, and then in the coastal United States. So again, to the why, it's also a question is there a regional component of this? Are there certain environmental exposures that you have depending on where you live in the world? Those are other theories
Are
that
those
are
any
coming
theories?
in.
Those are coming in?
With the diet, with the microbiome, with the theories about metabolic disease and obesity.
And we're such a
metabolism.
global
also-
society now, too.
There's
Yeah.
also some other theories that I think are worth mentioning because
Yeah.
I think they're just interesting. One is microplastics,
Mm-hmm.
that somehow the prevalence of microplastics in our diet, now we're finding them everywhere. We're
everywhere.
finding them in the brain, we're finding them in developing fetuses, microplastics, and that somehow that's disrupting the almost viscous kind of coating
the barrier.
of the microbiome and of the intestines, and that they're irritating it, and that might be something to look at, right, Fola?
Absolutely. So that fits into the theory that there are environmental toxins, are carcinogens, that are leading to this increase in colorectal cancer in young people. So microplastics is something that has been looked at. Microplastics are actually implicated in many diseases as well as colorectal cancer. The problem with microplastics is that the way that we have produced things in our society, from food to sofas and furniture to clothing, they're almost unavoidable.
I know.
at
We don't
this
have a
point.
test to like measure them
We
right
can't
now.
measure them,
No.
and we also
Although I
can't
think there are
say-
tests, I just don't think they're readily
Like commercial available.
or
Yeah.
are validated, and
Yeah.
we can't say that again that that's the smoking gun.
Right.
And that's why I keep coming back to this is probably a combination of factors
Right.
that you are exposed to. Probably not when you're 40, probably in your adolescence or even in your 20s.
Which just makes
that's
it really
making
scary. I
you
was
get
gonna say-
colorectal cancer in your 40s.
Can I
and
just
50s.
ask? I mean, I think
Can I
think-
mention one
please,
other
of course,
theory
then I've-
that I think is super interesting? Because I'd love to hear what Fola thinks about this. So we just had our Stand Up to Cancer
Yes.
Scientific Summit.
It was a great meeting.
We did a whole day on early onset cancers because there are 17 cancers that are on the rise in people under the age of 50.
terrifying.
And colorectal cancer is one, breast cancer is another, non-smoking lung cancer
Yes.
is another. And I'm so interested in all of these things. But I think one thing that I heard is something about screens. Now, the reason I mention this is, and it was kind of just sort of mentioned, but I wondered what you knew about this idea of our constant use of screens that perhaps in and of itself isn't a factor. Maybe it is. But how it disrupts the circadian rhythms and kind of sleep,
Wait, that's
and
fascinating.
how our interaction with technology and the impact it's having on our sleep cycles may be something that needs to be looked at. Fola.
And I think this is
Cute.
and I think that this is fascinating because mechanistically, this
Yes.
could be happening so many different ways.
Right.
So there
and
are some
affecting
people,
lots of different conditions.
and there are some people who think it's actually the cell phone itself in your
Right, like
pocket,
digitally, like-
and
there
some
was all
sort
that
of
research
exposure,
with
right?
brain tumors, right? But then they
Exactly.
discounted that.
So
right?
that theory was very popular for a while. Again, we have no evidence that a cell phone in your pocket is causing colorectal cancer.
It's not emitting waves.
But
that are-
people were looking into that. And then also, as Katie's mentioned, is it the light from the phone? Are using these devices that's throwing off our circadian rhythm? We know that sleep patterns, the amount of sleep, stress levels can be related to cancer risk. So that's a theory. And then also, let's talk about physical inactivity. One of the strongest associated factors with colorectal cancer is physical inactivity. So the more exposure we have to screens and screen time, the more time that we're spending at home on a screen,
So there's that
the
variable.
less
More
likely we're
sedentary
out.
we are.
And
Yeah.
who's on screens? It's the adolescents, it's the 20-year-olds. These are the people who 20 years later are getting colorectal cancer.
So it's a
there's
real
many
reason not
different
to-
mechanisms
not
for
to be
how
on your phone all the time. Right?
Yes.
So
yes.
I
We're
have to
taking all
ask-
the great things.
I know. Well, I mean, I have to ask though. I mean, thinking about my teenage daughters, right? I'm thinking about all of our friends. Hearing this, if someone's like listening to the three of us talk, I would be panicking right now.
Yeah, and
because
yeah.
a lot of the things that we're talking about too, right? Like the microbiome, which we're even struggling to, visualize. people are going to be asking, oh my gosh, like, what can I do about this? Or I'm already 20, is my microbiome or my exposures already in place? And what's in my control? Do I have access to food that's not highly processed? So, I mean, just to make it a little bit practical too, not only so people don't panic, but what should we be telling our young people and the people that love them?
And this is, I think, what Katie was getting back to as well, is what else can we do beyond talking about screening and symptoms? And I think that right now we're searching for those main pillars of advice that we can give to people. I do not want to set off alarms, and I don't want people to be panic. And I think when you talk about cancer, unfortunately, we have that impact. Yeah. This is why people sometimes don't like me at their dinner table. But
or at their charcuterie boards.
Yes, I know. My friends are like, don't invite that one. Right. But I think what I want to say is that we just have to think about things in moderation. Okay, so when you hear me talk about there is a risk between red meat and colorectal cancer, I'm not saying cut out all red meat. I'm saying instead of having red meat every night of the week, maybe have it once a week, okay? When I'm saying alcohol is one of these things that's associated with all cancers, including colorectal cancer, I'm not saying that you need to be alcohol-free in your life, but maybe think about reducing down to alcohol just on the weekends or once or twice a week. These are things that you can do to optimize your lifestyle without removing all the fun.
And those feel actionable.
Exactly.
I think there are a few other things, though. I mean,
physical inactivity. We talked about.
Obviously, exercising. Everyone needs to be on their phones less for our mental health. Certainly, young people. If you read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and what schools across the country are doing to have no phone school days. That's kind of something they can do. Also, I do think there are certain household products. Maybe we can get you a list, because one of the presenters at our scientific summit who runs this organization called Silent Spring. It's she
based
does
on Rachel Carson. Yes, exactly.
She does a lot of early onset breast cancer, and she had a list of household products that you really should avoid.
And that's education too.
Yes, and I'm going to get her to write something up in our newsletter about that. Great. I have actually a Zoom with her coming up. But also, I do think there are ways that I don't think you can completely avoid microplastics, even Fola, but I do think there are ways that you can try to reduce them. There are certain things that, takeout containers that you should try to avoid.
Don't heat things in plastic.
Don't heat things in plastic.
Right.
Exactly. And I don't know what the bottom line is. There was so much controversy about like black spatulas, and how they were made out of microchips and how bad they were. And then the Atlantic said they're bad. And then they said they're not.
They retracted.
But they retracted it, right? But I do think if you can try to reduce the amount of sort of plastic in your world, and then again, what Fola was saying, eat whole foods, eat foods that aren't
clean,
packaged.
Eat from the earth.
But
try to minimize your ultra-processed food. I mean, I'm guilty of it as well. My little protein bar I eat in the morning comes in a package, and I'm often thinking about what I can replace that with, even if I can replace that half the days of the week.
What's really hard, though, God, it's hard to be healthy these days, you guys, because now I'm 69, and of course I have osteopenia, and I have to keep my bones strong. So all my friends and everybody's saying you got to eat protein. So I'm like, okay, where do I get protein? From meat. And then I'm like, but I can't eat too much red meat. So where am I going to get 80 grams? And some people say, like, I should be having 125 grams of protein a day because I weigh 125. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to eat that much protein.
It's overwhelming.
And it is overwhelming.
I just want to point out what I'm hearing you both say, because you guys both have this gastrointestinal lens, is the advice that you're giving. That's a compliment.
Dr. Couric over here.
Dr. Couric, what's this advice that you're giving that does feel controllable and doable are those same things that we're thinking about in terms of your cardiovascular health, right?
Definitely.
Keeping your heart healthy, right? Other cancer risk factors. So the things that, again, feel doable, at least a little bit in our control about our nutrition, our diet, our lifestyle, sleep, screens, right? All of those kind of hygiene, those are things that feel very doable and very, very helpful while we're putting money and research, Stand Up to Cancer, into figuring this out.
Absolutely. And that's what I try to remind people, is that when we're saying make sure that you watch your diet. When we reduce your alcohol, eliminate tobacco, try to eat healthy, physical activity. It's not just for colorectal cancer.
Right.
Good for you.
This is going to be everything
Yes.
from your brain to your feet, and as in your health, from your cardiovascular, preventing other cancers. So I think that these are things that we all need to be teaching our children and our adolescents,
Yes.
and also adopting for ourselves, and are going to be good for the full body, mind, and soul.
I mean, I know you've brought so much awareness, and we really want to intend this to go into action. And then you're reminding me both. It's the education.
Yeah.
But even just the screening, though, I mean, I think people delay, again, whether they have, they're like, I don't have any symptoms. But tell us, like, screening makes a really big difference in how people do. So we're talking about genetic testing, but screening for colon cancer.
It is the difference between life and death.
It's the, right.
Absolutely.
So
That-
all those
plain and
heartbreaking
simple.
numbers, right? All those heartbroken families, right? This is going to make a dent in that if you get screened, not to mention your own life.
Well, especially in a disease that's
I'm not being
largely
dramatic, right?
asymptomatic.
Yes.
Screening can be everything. Screening can be the difference between life and death.
Yes.
And we're so fortunate in colorectal cancer that we have many ways to screen. So Katie did her colonoscopy on live TV in 2000.
It wasn't live, but thank you. It
Was it not
taped.
live?
No,
Oh, well,
I'm
I
not
tell
that
everyone it's
I'm
live.
not that brave, Fola.
Well, I should say they telecasted
Yes.
Katie's colonoscopy
I
on
told
TV
her it was my Roman
to
Empire.
us
Yes.
in 2000.
I remember exactly where I
And,
was.
I mean, everyone probably thought you were a little crazy when you did it, but she saved lives
I know.
because we call that the Katie Couric effect.
Well,
the
because
fact
people
that
saw a
she
face.
did this on TV,
Well,
national
also-
television, our rates of screening went up by 20%. That
Katie
is
Couric
the
effect.
best intervention we've had.
It was from such a pure place because, I had learned so much during the course of Jay's illness.
Yeah.
And I knew that people didn't feel comfortable talking about
stigma.
colorectal cancer. I knew that a lot of people couldn't even pronounce colonoscopy, much less get one. So I felt like it would be criminal if I didn't share with this huge platform I had at the time all that I had learned about this disease with an audience that, trusted me and knew that it was coming from a very personal place.
Absolutely. And many people have done that since to try to spread awareness, but I think that was the beginning of that. And I love that because especially at the time, colonoscopy was the main test we were using to screen. Now we have many different options. Not everybody can take a day off of work to get a colonoscopy. Not everyone has access to an escort, which is someone to take you to the procedure and home.
And drive you home.
Some people are fearful of having a procedure where you're put asleep and an instrument is put into your backside. So it's fortunate that we have other tests for people who fall into those categories and who want to be screened but don't think colonoscopy is for them. And that's when we can really recommend these stool-based tests. One of them is called the fecal immunochemical test or the FIT test, one of my favorite screening tools because it's cheap, it's easy, you can do at home. And at home, you open the kit, it tells you how to safely and cleanly collect a small sample of your stool from the toilet bowl. You package that up in a vial and you can actually mail that in or walk that into your doctor. And we can test that for signs of cancer or signs of these polyps, these precancers.
Is
So
that
that's
like
very
Cologuard
effective.
or there are various ones?
Cologuard
Is
is a
different?
little bit different. What they've done is they've taken that FIT test, which is actually looking for blood in the stool, which is a sign of cancer or polyps, and they've combined that with a genetic or DNA component. Okay, so Cologuard is another great screening option. You can do it in the comfort of your own home. A little bit of a bigger stool sample that you've got to mail in, but in their factory, they actually test that for signs of cancer. It's a little bit better at finding polyps, and it also is very good at finding cancers. So whether you want to have the more invasive procedure of the colonoscopy or one of these do-it-yourself at-home tests, there's many ways to get people access to screening now.
And it weeds out the people who don't necessarily need to get a colonoscopy. But if there is a positive, do they have
that's
issues
true.
with false positives and false negatives? They have some, but they've really reduced that, haven't
I actually
they?
just saw someone, influencer, post about this today on Instagram. She had a positive result, and she was asking people, what's the likelihood that I have a cancer? And what we tell people is that when you have a positive result, 1 in 10 people with a positive result actually have a cancer. I don't say that to scare people, but it's really to emphasize that if you have that positive result, you need need to go in for the second step,
Right. You
which
have
is
to follow
the
up.
colonoscopy.
Right.
And a lot of my research in May Lab at UCLA focuses on that, getting people in for that second step. In that case, the colonoscopy is actually imperative. So those people will need to get a colonoscopy, and that's when we check them for polyps or cancers that may have made the test positive. So that test, those stool-based tests do become a bit of a two-step process as compared to the colonoscopy, which is a one-step process.
But we always say the best test is the one that gets done.
Absolutely.
But so
Yeah.
Katie, when you hear what Fola is saying, I'm going to just say, the Couric effect 2.0. What's your plan? Like,
I know,
Well,
now
I
you've got to
mean-
tell
Put her
us
on
the
the spot.
plan.
I mean, I think we need much more research and understanding why young people are being affected by this disease and how scary it is. When you look at the numbers, they're really skyrocketing. We're not talking about a slight increase, right, Fola?
Yeah, it's a big
and
increase.
then
It's
to me-
3% per year.
Yeah, and then to me, the plan is doing everything we can that's within our power right now, obviously, being aware of symptoms, talking to doctors, making sure patients are keenly aware that if something's off, they need to pursue it and with their
Absolutely.
doctors. But in the meantime, or long term, I want there to be a test that is more accessible, less expensive, and that can be given to people, starting at age 18. Maybe I'm crazy about this, but I had coffee with really wonderful oncology fellow at Montefiore. Is it Montefiore,
Yeah,
right? Anyway, she's so nice. She's 35. She's really pretty, and she'd like a boyfriend if anyone knows anybody in New York. I love her. She's so great. But listen, we met for coffee because I'm a little bit of a yenta. I'm a good matchmaker, personally. That's one of my many unknown skills. But anyway, we met for coffee, and she said that past week, she had to tell a 21-year-old boy,
Yeah.
no family history,
Yep.
no Lynch syndrome, no familial polyposis, no nothing, that he had stage 4 colon cancer. And until we say, oh, sorry, poor guy, I mean, my goal, and I have nothing to do with it, but I'll support it in any way I can, is to come up with a better screening tool that's accessible to younger people. And that's why I'm excited. And I don't know, Fola, how you feel, and I'm opening up another can of worms here about liquid biopsies and blood tests that can, that are really in their nascent period of development, but they're starting, that can be done when you just get your yearly physical. And if there are cancer cells in that blood, you can say, hey, we need to look into this. But that's about all I know. That's the extent of my expertise. But what about better new screening techniques that aren't as costly or invasive, that can be utilized by the whole population?
during a annual physical.
Yeah, because I know the risk reward and all that stuff that public health advocates think about. Like, they can't screen everyone.
Yeah.
But I just am so upset when I hear about a 32-year-old man who has stage 4 colon cancer, or another girl I saw on Instagram who's like in her 20s, this 21-year-old I told you about. It's like, that is unacceptable to me.
Right. That these young people are the face of colon cancer is just
insane.
insupportable.
We use, we are often being contacted now by pediatric offices, trying to seek advice on how to treat colorectal cancer. And that was something that they never had to reach out to us about that before. So this is a phenomena that is affecting people at very young ages. There's a lot that we have to learn. I do think that the path forward does involve answering this question as to the why.
Yes.
We need research dollars to do that. We need to fund the best teams of scientists, not only in this country, but globally. Because to answer this question, I honestly think you need the science from Australia, from the UK, from Asia, from Africa, where we're starting to see these trends as well, to put these pieces together. And then I think the other priority, in addition to understanding the why, is what do we do in the meantime? And I think that's what Katie is getting to. Yes, we now have these blood-based tests. how can we effectively incorporate things like the blood-based test for colorectal cancer into normal practice safely in a way that we can follow up these patients in a reasonable manner? How do we decide which populations need to be tested and at what age? And those are all areas of research that also need to be prioritized.
And I also know that prevention, obviously, early detection is so critical. But I do worry. I mean, I think we have to put an emphasis on finding these cancers early, and colon cancer certainly when it's treatable and curable. And that's one of our goals for Stand Up to Cancer, because you can really reduce the number of cases. But I think about these people, like my husband, who are diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer. And I think about the fact that the treatment has really not changed much since the 50s, where it's 5-FU and leucovorin, right, is the kind of go-to treatment. And they've come up with some others, like, I guess, Campazar, I don't even know if that's
rectal
still
cancer,
used.
we've
And
had some breakthroughs.
rectal cancer, Dr. Diaz at Memorial, for a subset of people with rectal cancer. I mean, just phenomenal results. But it pains me and breaks my heart when I think that we can't also at the same time come up with better treatments for people who have advanced disease.
Absolutely.
You know, people like James Vanderbeek, who had stage 3. And you would think that that would have been potentially curable because he had systemic disease, but it hadn't metastasized, right? But he wasn't responsive clearly to the treatment. To people like my husband, to people like that 21-year-old boy, that the idea that there is very little that can be done for people with advanced colorectal cancer, that is unacceptable to me too. Immunotherapeutic approaches haven't borne much fruit in colorectal cancer, but we have to keep coming up with better treatments while we also encourage early detection, because I don't want to forget about the people who are dealing with stage 4 colon cancer.
So that's right. It's not one or the other.
Absolutely.
I guess we do have to wrap up, but I would very quick takeaway, if you don't mind. It's really hard for me to end this conversation. I can't
Isn't
think of
Fola great?
She's the best.
Oh,
I
come
mean, but
on.
I've known Fola for years. But I honestly,
What'd
for
you call
both of you,
yourself? Like the screen queen.
I know.
Listen,
I love
Katie Couric 3.0,
but
without,
I can't think of
without all
anything
the
more
work you're
important.
doing, I have nothing to talk about.
Thank you for talking about
this
this,
coupling
though.
of, again, like, you two are the dream team, right? I mean, on the larger level, it's Stand Up to Cancer, it's the May Lab, but together you're the dream team. I mean, I can't thank you enough for coming. I think this conversation truly changes lives. You know, the
I hope so.
Couric Effect 2.0, 3.0. I mean, I can't thank you enough. And I do really feel that, you know, if anyone is listening, I think if we moved anyone, even while we're trying to figure out the etiology, the cause, the why, better treatments, I think if we got one person to say, I'm moving from I should do this to I did schedule, I think that's the impact that we're looking for. And the two of you are so brilliant and compassionate, and just your advocacy is just so inspiring. I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Well, thank you
we all
for
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Eve,
for championing
having
this
us.
topic and for talking about it, because again, stigma has been a problem for our community.
Right.
So we're just so grateful to be here and to share what we can.
Yeah,
And if
many
you're
more.
45,
Get screened.
just call your doctor. What are you waiting for? Call your doctor. It's not that big a deal.
There are many options
You
for
know,
you.
there are many options, and a lot of people
can pick
complain
from a
about the
menu.
prep.
There's
I
a
complain
menu.
for colonoscopy.
Chill the prep.
I
Actually,
did
the prep's
prep.
pretty amazing. It's like
not
a free
that bad.
cleanse.
It's
So good.
it's like a colonic, but I mean the prep is not a lot of fun.
I call
say,
it the free cleanse.
but
Yes.
I always say it's so much better than being diagnosed
Yes.
with colon cancer.
And also that freedom you walk out with after the procedure, knowing that you don't have cancers or
Right.
polyps growing in your colon.
Or-
That's powerful.
And also, you do it for people you love.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And even the reassurance, since we both have 3 polyps because we're twins, that someone's monitoring me, right?
Yeah.
And I feel so lucky. And I think that's why this conversation about equity and access is so important. I don't think that we can't have it be a privilege, right? To be screened.
I
you know,
agree,
and have access
100%.
to
and
that.
what Fola is doing to educate everyone, people in rural communities,
Right.
people of color, people all over the country. It should be a right, not a privilege, and that is such an important message too.
Right. And clearly 45 is the new 50.
Absolutely.
69 is the new 60? I don't know.
You guys are the best. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
so much,
us.
and
Thank
many
you,
more
Eve.
conversations. I
Yeah,
would love
this
that.
is so fun. And
Okay.
thank you for doing this podcast because you're doing a real public service, bringing, I think, medical information, valid, science-backed medical information, which is so critically important right now in our current environment. And so thank you
Absolutely.
for doing what you're doing, Eve.
Thank you both so much.
It's a love fest.
It is. Science is so sexy.